Hi, and welcome to this episode of The Life of Purpose. My name is Kip McClurg, and this is my friend and colleague Bill Brunson. And we're going to be working through, in these episodes, through the Stations of the Cross. It is a good way to go back in a quiet way in those moments of meditation and remember the love that Jesus showed as he was in his last hours. Now, Bill, there are a lot of different, over the centuries, there have been different versions of this. Kind of share with us some of that history.
Well, the Stations of the Cross came about very early on in Christian history. The Catholic Church holds that Mary, the mother of Jesus, in the period of time when she was living in Jerusalem, would walk this path as frequently as she could, remembering this journey that her son took. And the path itself, even now, you can walk the Stations of the Cross in Jerusalem, and the path begins in the area of what was Antonia Fortress, which would have been where Pilate was there to hold court and to rule over the Jewish people during the time of Passover. And it began there and worked its way through the city, and then out of the city gate to the place of Golgotha. And that's where, of course, Jesus is crucified, and then to the actual area of the Garden Tomb. And so when you walk the Stations of the Cross, you pass through this area where Jesus would have moved, going from Pilate all the way through to where he is entombed in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. Now, they're traditionally two versions of the Stations of the Cross. One is the version that the Roman Catholic Church typically uses, and it has the stations that we know of, but then also that we find in the Bible, and then it also has some that are from the church tradition. It has at least one or two from church tradition. And so what we'll be reflecting on is what is considered to be the Protestant Stations of the Cross. And so rather than beginning with Pilate and beginning at that time of trial, we go all the way back to the Garden of Gethsemane. Now, as Kip said, this is a time of reflection and meditation, and that's what the Stations of the Cross became in the church throughout the centuries. Not everyone can go to Israel. Not everyone can go and walk through Jerusalem and stop at the different sites and the different locations and go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre where Golgotha is on this side and the area of the Garden Tomb is around on the other side and be able to stand in those places. And so churches all around the world began putting in the Stations of the Cross so that wherever you are and whenever you want to, you can remember this part of the ministry of Jesus that changed our world. And so it is a very meditative process to think through and pray through the Stations of the Cross. And so for us, we'll begin with Station 1, which for us, Station 1 is in the garden. In the Garden of Gethsemane on the side of the Mount of Olives, where Jesus and his three of his disciples go after the Last Supper in the upper room. They go out to the garden to pray, and it's in that Garden of Gethsemane, which Gethsemane means the oil press, where they press the olives to make olive oil. It's around that oil press, the Gethsemane, that Jesus and his disciples go and they pray. And so that's where our story begins, and that's where our journey begins.
Well, it's interesting, the scripture is filled with a number of different gardens. We have sort of in Genesis, the Garden of Eden, and then in the book of the Revelation, you have that being restored. And here's another garden. And somewhat like the one in Genesis, it's a time of temptation and trial and hard decisions. Mm-hmm. And Jesus asks his friends to stay with him awake, but they had finished a big meal, and it was late, and they weren't terribly helpful in staying awake with him. But he goes off by himself and begins some of the most intense and anguishing prayer that I think anybody can.
Right.
And I think we have all had those moments where there is before us a decision that we don't really feel physically capable of handling the decision. Just is almost overwhelming, and that seems to be where we find Jesus.
Oh, yes. I mean, he is in this time of anguish because he knows what's about to come. And that's the piece that is overwhelming to think about, that he's known what was coming for an extended period of time, for his whole journey through this world, from birth till this point in his life. He's known what was to come. But I can't imagine the anguish that's been building in him since he rode into the holy city on Palm Sunday, sort of setting off this chain of events. And he knows that it's about to happen. And so here he is praying, and this night will not end until some horrible things have already occurred. And within 24 hours, he's going to suffer horrible anguish on the cross. And when you're on the Mount of Olives and you're in the area of the Garden of Gethsemane, if you turn and look at Temple Mount, you're looking at, and Jesus would have been looking at the temple sitting up on top of Temple Mount, but where the temple sat is on top of Mount Moriah. And Jesus would have known that story. Mm-hmm. And so as he's looking at Mount Moriah, where the temple sits, he's remembering when Abraham takes Isaac up on that mountain, and he's going to sacrifice Isaac. And it's hard, and it's going to be painful, and it's so difficult. But suddenly there was the ram caught in the thicket. And so that's what God tells Abraham to sacrifice, is the ram, and to save Isaac. And here's Jesus in the garden looking at that mountain where that plan B came into effect.
Yeah.
And it's almost like he's praying and asking God, now, we're really at go time. Things are about to happen that it'll be really hard to walk back.
Is there a lamb anywhere?
Is
there a ram anywhere that's close by?
Yeah, I mean, if there's a ram in the thicket, we probably need to spotlight that right now. And so he keeps praying, if it's your will to take this cup from me, then that's good. But then he prays that part of the prayer that, for him, knowing what was coming had to be the hardest part of the prayer. And it's the hardest part sometimes for us to pray. Yet not my will, but thine be done. I mean, that's tough. That's tough.
Yeah, it's probably the ultimate prayer. I mean, it's really in the path of becoming like God, which we would use the word sanctification. Mm-hmm. It's probably that moment, that time when it's one of the hardest things to say, but say, I give up control to you, God. And Jesus was having to do the same thing.
Right.
And saying, your will is more important than what I want, even if it means, my death. It's interesting, it says that he sweated almost like drops of blood. And it's interesting, there is a condition called hematohydrosis. I'm not a medical expert. And that's not to say this is exactly what happened. Mm-hmm. But actually, there are cases of people who are under so much stress that it happens sometimes as a medical condition. For some people, it's just at times of such stress that the vessels begin to pour with sweat, blood. And so that just kind of reiterates how much pressure Jesus was under, knowing that everything is about to happen.
Right. It's his willingness to continue on this journey is an overwhelming love that we can't fathom, because he knows what's coming, and yet he stays faithful. It's God's will to be done, not his own will. If the cup doesn't pass, he will drink it. If there's no ram in the thicket, he goes. He sacrifices himself for us. And that's amazing, and that's overwhelming. And of course, he's sitting there in the garden praying, and you're right, the disciples were of no help whatsoever. I mean, he goes back to them, waking them up again and again. Can't you stay awake for just an hour and pray?
I mean, it's almost like he needs to write them up,
Yeah.
give them a little warning. You're not doing your job here.
That's right. I mean, it's like, okay, if we were going to do this again, next time I'm bringing 3 other people. It's Andrew, Philip, and Nathaniel. They're coming with me. I mean, because they just don't do their job. But then he tells them to get up because he knows what's about to happen. If you remember back in the upper room at the table, he indicates to the disciples that one of them would betray him. And he gives the bread after he dips it to Judas, who is sitting next to him, and tells him, what you do quickly. And here he is.
And he did it quickly too.
Yes, Jesus has prayed, not my will, but yours be done. And he hears probably the rattle of chains and clanking of armor, and here appears Judas.
And Judas had gone to the chief of priests, and I'm sure they were just kind of shocked that here is one of Jesus' own coming in and voluntarily saying, I'm willing to betray this guy. Mm-hmm. And so they work out a financial arrangement, and they're wanting to get him at a place where there's not a lot of people. It was commonly known by the people that knew Jesus well that he spent a lot of evenings in the Garden of Gethsemane. He was able to get away from the crowds and away from the city. And so Judas knew that would be an easy place to get a small group of the army and soldiers, particularly the religious police, to show up and to arrest him. And so that's where we come to our second station of the cross. Judas has all this lined up, and suddenly there's the noise of them coming into the garden.
Right. And so for us, station 2 is Jesus is betrayed. Betrayed by one of his very own. Betrayed by someone who has been with him for 3 years, who has seen the miracles. He's heard the teachings. He has been present when Jesus walks on water. He was there when Lazarus comes forth, and I mean all of these events. He sat at the table with Lazarus after he was resurrected back from the dead by Jesus, and he's also the only member of the disciples who has a job in the group. He's respected enough, or at least honored enough, that he is the one who keeps the purse. He's in charge of the money for the group. And that's why when he leaves the table, some people think that he's actually gone off to pay the bill, to settle up on what was needed for their meal. And even at the table, he's seated to the left of Jesus, because Jesus hands him that bread. And we know that he's seated in the place of ultimate honor at the table with Jesus. Judas on one side of Jesus, John on the other side of Jesus. I mean, this is a powerful place he is in. And here he comes, someone who, by all outward appearances, someone who is among the most faithful, most dedicated, most committed. He comes and he betrays Jesus.
With a kiss.
With a kiss.
Which is, to me, is the ultimate insult.
Yeah.
To say, I mean, you are someone beloved of me, now you're going to die.
Right.
And so,
right.
So who does that? And,
yeah.
and there he is, and he does that. And there's a lot of questions I have why Judas do that. And I think the best explanation that I can think of involves what happens next, which is one of the disciples pulls out a sword and is going to defend him, going to fight. And I think, I wonder if the disciples really heard what Jesus' kingdom was all about. And they were still, and I think Judas, the best explanation I have is that Judas had an understanding that the kingdom was going to be a physical kingdom, and that Jesus was going to literally, march into Jerusalem right in there and take it over
Right.
as David, kind of the stories of David. And the reality is, he wasn't going to do that.
No.
And so, why did I waste 3 years of my life if we're still going to have Roman rule? And so he comes in with them. Some of the disciples pull out their sword because they obviously thought the same thing.
Yeah.
And Jesus stops it all and says, no, this is not what we're about.
Yeah, Judas doesn't seem to understand the prayer that Jesus has prayed just before this. Not my will, but yours be done. He doesn't understand that it's following Jesus wherever Jesus leads and however Jesus leads. Judas doesn't quite get that, and I don't think the other disciples fully understand that, and sometimes we don't understand that. But it's still what we're supposed to do. Not my will, but yours be done. And to follow Jesus wherever.
And so Jesus heals the ear, and they begin their march out of the garden. And suddenly Jesus goes from one of the most celebrated teachers, quietly being drugged through the night, to what is going to become one of the worst 24 hours of his life.
Absolutely.